No. No, homebrewing is not dead, it's not dying. Now, I know that I'm just some small YouTube channel. I don't have a lot of subscribers yet. Y'all probably don't necessarily care what I have to say on the subject, but I know that this topic's really been trending lately, and not even just on YouTube, like in real life discussions. And I kind of have to appease the algorithm and talk about trending things. And maybe after this video, YouTube might even start pushing my content a little more. All right, Emmy's gonna join us for at least a little bit of this video now. But I've noticed a lot of my favorite BREWTUBERs asking and answering this question lately. And beyond that, I've been seeing this discussion happen all over the place. It pops up every now and again on the various brewing subreddits, but also like local subreddits and, other non-brewing forums. I even see non-beer people asking questions like, what's going on with my favorite brewery? Or where is this beer I like? Or like, why is everything hazy? And I've actually even had this conversation offline, with real people, on multiple different occasions with multiple different people. And the other BREWTUBERs in their videos, they kind of came at this either from like a craft brewing background, being in the industry, or like with, stats and analytics and, graphs and stuff from their channels. But I don't have any of that. I don't have any graphs for you, and I've never worked in the craft beer industry. What I do have is, the fact that I spent my 20s drinking and making beer. And what I actually mean by that is that I've just been so immersed in all this stuff for almost 20 years now. I watched the craft beer renaissance come and peak and then kind of fade out. And I've been brewing this whole time, but not just brewing, like engaged. And so I can see what's going on and, I have my observations. And no, homebrewing is not dead. It's not dying. It's not going anywhere. It's just changing. I guess if you focus on just the narrowest sliver of homebrewing, beer making, like in that Brewlosophy video, then yeah, that's probably on a downtrend. But even that's not going anywhere. And I talked about this in my first video, which you can go watch, but it's not really my best work. But I think it's best to focus on the hobby as a whole rather than just beer. And if you zoom out and look at it like that, it actually seems like the hobby's exploding. Lately, there's been less of a focus on beer, and beer making has become sort of a niche within the hobby. But while beer's been in a downtrend, the other stuff has surged. Mead in particular seems to be having sort of like a homebrewing renaissance. People are loving mead lately, but also, wine, cider, etc., etc. And Golden Hive has made all of those weird things, like the Mountain Dew mead and stuff like that, very popular. And along that same vein, there's been this sort of gravitation within the hobby towards like the prison hooch thing. And when I say prison hooch, I'm talking like the subreddit, not like actual prisoners making hooch. It's about going back to simplicity and using real world ingredients and having fun instead of min-maxing everything. And don't get me wrong, I like the min-maxing and optimizing and all of that too, but there's a time and a place and an audience. All right, she might be ready to lay down for a little bit. And if you stop and you take a step back and you take a good look at it, it's not really all that surprising. First of all, people really do seem to be drinking less beer these days. Even amongst my friend group and my generation, people are reaching for White Claws instead of Bud Lights and, just other things in general. Well, that didn't last long. Anyways, I think the real reason for the downtrend, at least within the hobby, is just that beer is complicated. It is, one of, if not the most complicated things we can make as homebrewers. The Brew Show put out a video just like this one, and in it, Trent came to basically the same exact conclusion. He pointed out that as beer makers who are entrenched in the hobby, a lot of us are focused on like the expensive equipment and, minute details like mash efficiency and attenuation and water salts and, pH. But even before that, there's all these complex and precise chemical processes with the mash and boiling and carbonating, and all these things are necessary to make beer. And that makes it more complex and less approachable than, something like wine. And so it's really not surprising that people are gravitating more towards these more approachable things than beer. Imagine this. Someone's new to the hobby and they go out online just looking for information on how to get started. And first they stumble on any of these beer making videos. And they're great videos. They're very informational, very informative, inspirational, educational, entertaining. And I have made and will make videos just like them. But this person is presented with like thousands of dollars of equipment, with all kinds of ports and dials and pumps and hoses and things that just look daunting. And on top of that, there's the complicated, concepts like mashing and water chemistry, and these things can be very overwhelming when you're new. Now imagine that next they stumble on like a city setting video or the book Make Mead Like a Viking. And it's pretty obvious which process is easier and more approachable. And I'm a huge proponent of when you're getting into anything new, not just homebrewing, you start with the fundamentals.
You know how much I like the fundamentals?
And so even for those who are into beer brewing, they might still start with something easy like that fruit juice hooch we just made, and then, level up from there. But then not everyone wants to make beer. And especially with the current, society-wide trends towards seltzers and things like that, there might be many who get into this hobby and never make beer. And that's okay. There's room in this hobby for all of us. Now, real quickly, I just want to talk about, the wider craft industry. This is a homebrew channel, not, a craft brewing channel. So I don't really want to harp too much about the industry. But I think there's something to be said about what's going on out there to, give it some context. And honestly, it's kind of similar in a weird way. Craft brewing is not going anywhere. It's not dead or dying. It's just different now compared to what it was during like the height of the craft beer renaissance. Some breweries are closing, but others are growing and expanding. And then you've also got like the cideries and the meaderies and all that popping up. And craft brewing's moving towards simplicity, kind of like home brewing. But instead of, the simplicity of process and equipment, it's like simplicity of business structure. Homebrew for Life put out a video on this topic, and in his video, he actually talked a lot about craft breweries. What he said is that what makes a brewery successful is not so much the beer and the quality of the beer, but their hospitality. And I definitely have to agree with that. But I think I'd turn that statement on its side a little bit and say instead of hospitality, it's more marketing and, running a successful business. Craft beer peaked, it seemed like around 2015, at least in my area, and then went on a bit of a downturn. By 2018, it seemed like a lot of the breweries that I enjoyed going to, earlier on, were starting to slow down, be less busy. This was also around the time, I think, that I started seeing my first hazies, and mead seemed to start getting popular. And then 2020 came along and wiped the whole thing out. At this point, a lot of the breweries started shutting down due to COVID and, some other things. But interestingly enough, the ones that didn't started growing and expanding and got pretty big once, all the restrictions were lifted and the lockdown was over and all that. And those weren't necessarily the ones with better beer or like a wide variety of beers. It was usually the ones with the better setups. Like CH said in his video, it was the ones where the girls were going to, or the family-friendly ones where kids could play, or the ones that had like the fun drinks. And when it comes to beer, those drinks were hazies. And from a business perspective, that makes sense. The key to running a successful business is finding your market and catering to that. And the biggest chunk of the market, most of the people going to the breweries, is not actually the beer nerds like us. Even during peak craft beer, when there were hundreds of things on tap, I'd go out with my friends to the bars and the breweries and stuff. And there'd be like me and one or two other guys. We'd try all the different beers that were available and enjoy them and consider them and discuss them and stuff. But most of the people in our friend group were not doing that. Most of them would just pick a beer they already knew they liked and just drink that all night. And that's most people. Most people are just going to walk into a bar, pick something off the beer list that they know and they recognize and they know they're going to like, and that's it. And in all honesty, that doesn't even need to be beer. That could be a cider or a seltzer or a cocktail or something else. And so with that in mind, what makes the most sense, from a business perspective, is to cater to those people, not the beer nerds. And so if hazies are the most popular and your target market just wants to drink something they already know is going to be good, it makes the most sense just to make hazies and to tailor your entire business to making hazies. And on top of that, if you make all of them the same hazy, then someone can walk into any bar anywhere and pick any hazy off the menu, regardless of logo or branding or the name of the beer or any of that. And they know what it's going to taste like, and they know they're going to like it. And so why not just build your business based on that? Don't come up with any other recipes that aren't hazies. Don't spend money on ingredients that don't go into making a hazy, and don't tie up any of your equipment, making batches that aren't hazies. Because only a very small handful of beer nerds will even care that you did any of that. And so that's my theory. The breweries that were catering to the beer nerd and coming up with all sorts of fun and experimental beers or, different styles and had a whole bunch of stuff on tap, those are the ones that are gone now. The ones that survived and expanded are the ones that ran their business a lot more efficient. But that's just beer. And there's a whole lot more going on than just beer. While many breweries are shutting down or closing or whatever, there's lots of cideries and meaderies and all sorts of other fun things popping up. And they're starting to do some more fun and experimental things. Doing the Most actually put out an interesting video recently. And in it, he wasn't asking the question, is homebrewing dead? He was talking about cider, but I still think it's relevant to this discussion. In it, he kind of went over a bunch of the, cutting edge and innovative things going on in cider and the cider industry right now. All of the information and science and, new products and equipment, coming out just for cideries. And the way he described it sure sounds a lot like beer about 10, 15 years ago during the craft beer renaissance. New cideries are popping up and they're exploring and experimenting with all sorts of new ingredients and styles and ways of doing things, since there's not really a baseline yet. And the most interesting thing for us is that a lot of what they're learning and finding out and coming up with, it's all trickling down to the homebrew level. And that's just cider. A lot of similar things have been happening with mead and a lot of the other stuff as well. And so I don't know if that's going to continue along this path or things are going to be different this time around. But if we did end up with some sort of cider or mead renaissance like we had with craft beer, that'd be pretty cool. There's actually a lot to be excited about with homebrewing. Far from dying, it seems to be growing to me. And if you are exclusively a beer maker and you don't want to do anything else, you can do that. In fact, that part's not changing. It's not going anywhere. You're going to continue to be able to get whatever ingredients you want and make whatever beer you want. In fact, I don't think anything's going to be able to compete with beer on that anytime soon. Because you can, and will continue to be able to, go onto some site like morebeer.com and buy any kind of malt, any kind of hop, any kind of yeast, and make any kind of recipe or style that you want. And not only can you get it, they will ship it right to your door. By the way, next time you do that, and if you're making beer, I know you will, just use the QR code on screen or the link in the description below. It really helps support the channel. But you're not able to do that with cider apples or wine grapes or, whatever. But if you're not exclusive about beer and you're willing to branch out, the other things are pretty cool too. Even for beer makers, ciders, meads, wines, they're all fun and they have a lot of value too. I can tell you, especially as I get older, I have more job responsibilities and family responsibilities and just generally less time for myself. Speaking of, and it can be so much easier sometimes to not just have a shorter brew day, but not even have to think about carving out time for it. See, beer is an event. I have to spend most of a day putting together a batch. But like I talked about in the cider video, with anything else, you can just squeeze in 15 minutes here and there to just throw together some ingredients and pitch some yeast, and you have a batch going. And so with that, I can continue to have stuff on tap, bottles ready, stuff fermenting, even when I don't have much time. And yeah, maybe most of the time I'm reaching for my house IPA, but sometimes a cider sounds good. Sometimes maybe a spiced mead. And having those things available, having options, and being able to pick what I want is pretty awesome too. And I think going forward, that's a lot of what this hobby is going to look like. I think a lot more people are doing all of it. Some people, like me, might prefer beer, but that doesn't mean they can't do the other things too. And other people might never brew beer because it's complicated and they just don't care enough. And all of that is perfectly okay. And the cool thing is that all of that matters, and not in some sort of hippie vibe kind of way. Like, the information and knowledge and skills that we learn from making one thing generally applies to all of the rest of it. And so while you're making cider, making mead, a lot of these concepts overlap. Fermentation is fermentation, whether you start by mashing grain, whether you're using honey or fruit, some of it might be specific, but the core process stays the same. And so even if we're doing different things, we can discuss and share and learn from each other and grow the overall knowledge and come out ahead. Well, let me know what you think. Do you think homebrewing is dead or dying? Or, maybe you don't even care. Maybe all you care about is beer. Drop your thoughts in the comments. This was an interesting one, but hopefully with the next one, we'll be back to your regularly scheduled programming, and I'll have something instructional or informational or actionable for you so you can actually learn and grow and, get better with it. But I guess until then, I'll see you in the next one.